What is up, everybody? My name is Augie Schmidt, and I'm a commercial real estate entrepreneur living here in Central Florida. In this video, I'm going to tell you how one cold call turned into a $282,000 commission. So this deal started out, I was calling on a 4,000 square foot space for lease, which would have been about a $5,000 or $6,000 commission. But by doing the things that we are supposed to be doing, asking the questions and providing incredible value, this turned into almost a $300,000 commission. Before we get into how the deal actually went down, I want to tell you more about the property. So, Century Boulevard Industrial Park was a 9-building asset that was about 125,000 square feet. At the time, there were 38 tenants in the park, which called for a great deal of complexity. That means there's 38 different leases, start and expiration dates, rental amounts, and also these leases, some were signed back in 1970, and some were signed like later the year before that. So, it happened all different times of these leases started and expiring, and tenants were also moving out and moving in during the transaction and even when the property was under contract. So the complexity of the transaction with 38 tenants, you do have to know what you're doing. If you don't, make sure you have a senior advisor or somebody looking over your shoulder and on the transaction with you to provide incredible value to the clients and then also get the ideal outcome for the client as well. So this was something that I took on. It was solely me on the transaction, and I did all of the underwriting, all the research, even though I had people that second checked my work. So when doing a transaction this size and also the complexity of it, it's always good to have a friend or associate or a superior double check your work. One of my favorite parts of this transaction was getting to know the 38 tenants and their businesses and also how they provide value to the market. So in this one property, like I said, it was across 9 buildings, but we had everything from an MMA gym, we had a steel fabrication shop, we had a baseball training facility, and then we also had like a dog obedience school. And the dog obedience was actually the biggest building or the biggest tenant in the park. They took one entire building that was like 10,000 square feet. And when I say dog obedience, I don't exactly mean like, you take your dog to the school and they teach them how to sit and lay and not like pee or poop on the floors. I mean like the type of school that, you're flipping through the channels as a kid on like ESPN 8 and you see people like running around this big like gymnasium, and the dogs are like going up these ramps and jumping through these hoops and doing all like types of crazy things, and the people are always like dressed up in a suit. It's kind of weird to me, but this was the like #1 training ground for these dogs in this type of sport, I guess if you would call it, in the state of Florida. They had awards everywhere. They were nationally recognized. But long story short, it was just really cool to learn about their business and the experience of seeing an operation like that. But I will be completely honest that when I walked in the doors, I did not expect to see that. As I mentioned, there were 9 buildings in this park, and they were built between 1970 and 2000. They were all steel construction. They all had about 16 to 20 foot clear heights. I believe one was 22 and the lowest one was 16. So somewhere on the lower side, but it still worked for all the businesses in the park, and these buildings were incredibly taken care of. Now, I just want to go ahead and say that this property was managed, and it was a so-called mom and pop operation of what we would call on the market. However, the way it was managed was better than a lot of professional management companies that I've seen. So this place was immaculate. All of the steel on the side of the buildings was taken care of. It was freshly painted. The landscaping was taken care of. All of their documents and accounting and finances were all in a row. So, this was something that was incredibly relieving for me to see. And honestly, like I said, I know the market can knock a mom and pop operation, and the general consensus is that they are disorganized and properties are falling apart. But this mom and pop operation, the husband and wife team, they took care of business and they had all their ducks in a row, and honestly it made it for a much easier asset to sell because everything, like I said, they had all their I's dotted and their T's crossed. So all in all, this was an incredibly family to deal with. Not only they had their ducks in a row, but they were just awesome people to deal with. They had a ton of grace. They were very nice. And like I said, the transaction really just was an incredible match made between our firm and between them. So the whole thing went pretty smoothly. This was during the year 2020, so there were some bumps in the road. However, the people that we were dealing with, everybody was playing at a high level, the buyer and the seller, and we like to think we are here as a firm. So the transaction altogether went pretty smoothly. But when you get to this deal size range, it usually goes like that, because once you get to a higher dollar number, usually people that are playing in the 5, 7, $10 million asset space, they didn't get there by accident, and they have to be good to get there. So that is something I always remember when looking at smaller transactions and larger transactions, that the larger transactions are actually sometimes easier to do. So that's just something to remember, a tidbit of advice for you. So I want to take it back from the start and tell you how this transaction actually got started, and giving you a little more tactical advice on how you can do transactions like this too. So I was doing what I was supposed to be doing for a smaller assignment. So I had a tenant looking for a 6,000 square foot space for lease, and I was surveying the market and seeing everything that was out there, and I came across a space that was within this park that was 4,000 square feet. I saw it was for lease by owner, which is pretty rare. If you're in this business and you know that, sometimes you see a for sale by owner, it's usually from driving the market. For lease by owner, you see that sometimes as well, driving the market, but this one was actually listed on the internet on a major listing website as a for lease by owner. So I saw it was only 4,000 square feet. I had a tenant that needed 6,000 square feet, but I thought in my head, I'll call on it anyway. I'll strike up a conversation. Maybe they have 2,000 square feet that is coming available next door. We can combine the spaces, or maybe there's another space in the park that's coming available. I don't know. However, I knew it was close, so I wanted to see if there was a deal to be done here. So once I got on the phone with the family, I talked to the wife about this space, about the park. They said they had nothing else available. This was the only thing. They usually stay 100% occupied, and this was, 4,000 square foot was all they had. So the tenant that had the 6,000 square foot space, we actually ended up putting them somewhere else. And this conversation that we had with the owner of the 4,000 square foot unit, which we then found out it was actually a 125,000 square foot industrial park, we continued to foster that relationship while we took care of the tenant at another property. So I continued to talk to the owners of the Century Boulevard Industrial Park, and I learned about their needs, what their plan was for the property, and just started asking some questions, when they owned it, how they bought it, and what their plan was for the future. And this is at the time that she mentioned retiring. I knew they were running it themselves, which I commended them and thought that was very impressive. And so when they mentioned retiring, I asked what their plans are for the property, and at that time she mentioned she thought the property was worth between $3 and $4 million. So at this time, I went into my brain bank and said, hey, I know that prices per square foot of properties like this are probably closer to $50 to $60 a square foot, and that would equate to about a $7 million transaction or more. So I did not say this at first because I didn't want to dangle a carrot or get them too excited, but what I did was the responsible thing, in which I said, hey, I believe it might be significantly more than that. I want to do an analysis and I want to double check for you guys, but this is something we will do completely free. So if you can send over all the rent rolls, the P&Ls, all of the leases, and all the documentation we need, we will perform a complimentary analysis for you, and we will tell you what your property is worth. So it took me about 4 to 5 days to do the analysis, and I came back and I said to the owners, hey, indeed, this property, I believe that we can get more than $7 million. So they were ecstatic at the time. As I mentioned, they thought the value was truly around $3 to $4 million, and we said, hey, we're going to find you another $2 to $3 million in this transaction. So we decided to list the property for about $7.5 million, and ended up closing 6 months later for just over $7 million. The final sale price was actually $7,050,000. It was a very special day because on the closing day, and yes, we got paid a lot of money. Yes, we did a deal that we worked incredibly hard on. But as I mentioned, it was a mom and pop operation that managed this property. So on closing day, they actually retired. They ended up doing a 1031 transaction, and they also ended up buying a beach house, and they always had these dreams of what they were going to do with the money. They've worked incredibly hard to build this property up over the 30 years that they've owned it. And on closing day, they were able to retire and then live comfortably and fulfill those dreams that they had. Also, I could end the video here and just tell you how much I made and then be on our merry way, but I don't want to miss what we did after this. So from this transaction, I had a long list. I was going to say Rolodex, but for the younger folks, you might not know what that is. I didn't use those. I just learned from the older guys what that is. But I had a long list of buyers that were all of a sudden playing in the $5 to $10 million range. So I said, hey, now I have all these people that are actively looking for industrial investment properties. I can then go help them find other deals. But one thing that I did with this transaction, and how most of you know is the best way to get paid is to get listings. So one thing I did with this transaction is I put the property information in a packet and used it more as like a comparable sale. So I edited the packet that we had. When we marketed the property, it was a 25 to 30 page packet with all the pictures and the information. We call that an offering memorandum in our business. So I took that information and then I made it into more of a comparable sale flyer, and I packaged up, I believe it was a little less than 100 of those, and I binded them. I put a cover sheet and a back cover on it, made it a nice brochure, and then I sent it out to about 100 property owners that had properties just like this. So I sent all of those out. And also, pro tip, one thing I did is, I didn't want to be lazy about it. On the envelope that I sent them in, I hand wrote all of the names, addresses to the people that they were going to, maybe the entity that it was on. The best way is to find the actual contact name of that entity and address it straight to that person. But the difference between doing a printed label and then a handwritten name and address on an envelope makes a world of a difference. If you just think about it for yourself, you have to think like a consumer. So you say when you get something in the mail, if it's printed, you are much less likely to open it than if it is handwritten. So I hand wrote all of these names and addresses on these envelopes, and I sent it out to 100 property owners. I then followed up with a phone call, and throughout these phone calls, there was one more transaction that came out of this, which made all of those mailers, all that time, all those handwritten addresses worth it. So it was about a $6.5 million transaction. It's that one right there. And actually Century Boulevard is right there. So this was the original transaction that we did for about $7 million. And then that one was about $6.5 million, which we were sending out our mailers on. And we struck up a conversation with the property owner, and similar thing. He was a little bit younger and he wasn't exactly retiring, but trying to move on to the next phase of his life. Did an analysis, told him it was worth about $6.5 million, ended up listing and closing a deal. So I say all of this to say the two biggest lessons in this video is to do the detail and the hard work. Remember, this transaction came from a 4,000 square foot space for lease. That commission check would have been about $5,000, and it ended up being a $282,000 commission on that one deal. And then we went to do the things that we were supposed to be doing, which is lesson number 2, and say, hey, once we close this deal, we have this nice sale that we want to spread to the market. We want to say, hey, look what we did. Here's a good comp for you. Also, what's your property worth? How can we help you? And we send that out to the market, and we follow up with phone calls. So by doing that, that was another $6.5 million transaction that we did after this. So by doing those two things, that's just two of the many things that brokers should be doing in their business to make the most out of transactions. No matter how small or big they are, we can see in this scenario, they can be incredibly small and turn incredibly large. So be faithful with little, you'll be faithful with much. And in this transaction, in both of these transactions, that was certainly the case. So that will conclude our video for today. But as promised, I was going to tell you exactly what I brought home for this property. So this was quite a few years ago. I'm on a better split now, but many of you know that, when you get a gross commission check, there are splits, there are other deductions that come out of these gross commissions for what you actually take home. So in this transaction, on a $282,000 gross commission, I ended up taking home about $195,000. This was before taxes. Still need to pay Uncle Sam. Be sure to put a large chunk of that away. But this was about a $200,000 take-home check to me, something I was incredibly grateful for. Not only was a large payday for myself, but also a great deal to have under my belt and really a gold star on my resume, for me to go do bigger and better deals. So as always, please like and subscribe this video, screenshot it, share it to your social media, tell a friend, tag somebody in it. Truly, that helps us go so much further faster, and we would really, really appreciate it. Also, drop a comment of what you want to hear next time, and we'll see you then.